Hello, testing. Let me know if the audio is working while we get the stream set up. Um, just have another minute or two to get things ready. Is it working? Can you guys hear me? Cool. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I guess we'll get started. This is another one of our streams that we're been hosting more regularly now. I think we've been doing a lot of work on Aura, over the last many months, and we do a lot of development internally and making demos. So we just want to try to show off more of what we're doing, provide more documentation of how to use it, and just talk about game dev. We're all experienced game dev nerds, and it's just fun to talk about. So happy to have another one to talk with you guys around this. For myself, I'm Kevin. I'm one of the engineers at working on Ramen on Aura. I come from more of an engineering background. Our last couple of streams we've done were with Rob, who comes from more of an art background. So this time we'll be talking a bit more about the gameplay engineering side of things. For myself, yeah, hi, nice to meet you guys. For myself, I've been in the industry for a long time. I think I've been making games for probably almost 20 years, a combination of AAA development, indie development, tools development. I've kind of been all over the place. A lot of my experience at AAA has been at Blizzard on a number of different big AAA Blizzard titles. Um, I've worked on Starcraft II, Here's the Storm, this handful of unannounced titles that unfortunately got canceled that I wish I could talk about, but had a lot of fun working on them nevertheless. And yeah, so we're going to talk more about this demo we have here. So this demo is something we showed off, I think, last week with Rob, and he focused more on the art side of things. But this time we're going to dig a bit more into more of the gameplay side of things. So this is a map. I think Rob talked about it a bit last time. It's based on one of the games from Roblox called 99 Nights. Internally, we've been doing some testing where we just try to find some game concept and then in 1 week kind of build it from scratch. The art, the gameplay, all the engineering stuff, just to kind of test out our tools, see how they work, and test them in the right context. So we're just kind of showing off the stuff that we've done so far on this level, as well as walking through some of the learnings. And I also want to talk about just some general best practices of if you're building content yourself, what are some things you should think about? I know a lot of people that use our tools are not necessarily, super experienced people, AAA developers. They might just be indie developers, might be hobbyists, might have some Unreal experience, but I think it'd be fun to talk about general best practices and kind of learnings. Um, so that's what we're going to go over the stream. We're going to kind of talk about the stuff we built, some of the gameplay systems, dig into some blueprints, dig into some C++, maybe build a few things, and kind of talk about how it all works. Um, and just for some context, I will play through this a little bit just to show off what we're even talking about. So this is a little kind of survival crafting game, like I mentioned, based on the Roblox map. So you start in this world, you have this little campsite, and the goal of it is to kind of survive in this world, harvest some resources and trees, and try to survive the night when creatures come out to attack you. And it's all based on a Roblox map, and the art style you can probably see is more of a stylized kind of Studio Ghibli kind of feel. So just kind of run through the functionality, just so you have the context. We have this little campsite, we have this campfire in the middle, and it's unlit. So if we go over here, we have some basic tree chopping. So if we go up to the tree and I click, it smacks the tree and it shakes and it'll explode into some logs. Once we have those logs, we can kind of pick them up, throw them around, and you can take these logs and you can put them in the campfire to light it up, and you can gather more logs to level up and get to progress this game. You also have this axe. You also have a bag where you can kind of pick them up and put them right into your bag, and you can kind of drop them off back onto the ground. So you can also pick up your logs and throw them into your campfire. And I should have collected faster because when it becomes nighttime, some of the enemies come out and start attacking. So if I just grab like a few more logs, okay. So now that the deer monsters are attacking me, so I didn't do a good enough job. So besides that, there's also a couple of little things on the map. There's like some loot chests you can find, and you can pop them open. They give you some loot that you can pick up in your bag. Um, there's also a wolf over there walking around, and then some of the art stuff, like you can see that watchtower down there. That's what Rob showed off last week. If you want to see more about the art construction side, you can watch that stream last week. But besides that, that's kind of the core loop right now. Spawn in, day-night cycle, collect things, go on your campfire. So if we take this, we can kind of break it down from what are the systems we built, how do they work, and some of the workflows that we found useful internally when building content like this to kind of hopefully give you guys some direction on how to use Aura. So let me put this back to my Aura window on the side. So I'd say when you're thinking about trying to use Aura on games like this, there I'd say there are like three main ways that I think about these tools being useful. Like at the end of the day, we're trying to build things to empower creators to help you work better, work faster, and also empower like less technical people to build the things that they want to build and help designers kind of build the content without having to be blocked by not understanding how engineering works. So I kind of think about this from three different kind of categories. One of them is just asking questions about like, how does this game work? How do I build it? Explain to me as maybe a non-technical person how to use these things. The second category I usually think about is editing. So maybe you already have a template you've downloaded, maybe you already have some content and you want to fix the bug, you might want to add a little feature. It's also very helpful for kind of like finding the context for you to show you how to edit something. And the last category is more of the building content. You have a new idea, you want to build it from scratch. It can also help you with that. So there's kind of these three different workflows that you can use Aura for. And I would say the first ones are probably the more like directly, immediately useful. The building stuff from scratch is more harder, and you probably progress up that chain as you're using these tools. So like for me personally, when I jumped on this little demo, one of my coworkers made a lot of it. So when I jumped in, I had no context of how it worked. What are all the systems in here? How are they built? So for me, I love to just jump in and say like, hey, like what's a good overview of this project? Just explain to me what are the core systems? How do they work? So Aura is really great at that. It just kind of scans through the whole project and gives you a nice summary. There's a player with like movement and there's inventories. It maps out different attacks, different enemies, has a nice list of, okay, there's like inventory, harvestables, campfire, enemy health. And I love using this just to dig into how existing projects work and code bases. I find it super useful. Um, it's also great for trying to learn about how a specific system works. Like if I'm trying to pick up one of my coworkers' systems, I can ask it, hey, like give me a walkthrough of specifically how tree chopping works. So maybe we can dig into that. So in the map, we have a system where you can walk up to a tree, left click, and the tree gets chopped. And one of the unfortunate things about Unreal and game development is that that seems like a very simple thing, but when you want to implement it, it's actually pretty complicated. And there's like a dozen different moving pieces that have to be connected together. And it's been, unfortunately, a large learning curve, I think, for a lot of people that want to get into game dev. So this is one thing I'm particularly excited about of how do we make that bridge easier. So to kind of dig through that, or I can give you a nice demo of exactly how it all pieces together. So to kind of go like I guess one level deeper, the technical level, when you have a character, you have a let's click the button that happened, then a bunch of things happened, and at the very end, the tree fell down. So there's a number of different gameplay systems that kind of flows through. For the input system, there is a input action, which defines like the core key that you press pretty much to do the action. And it also lets you define the actual keyboard or mouse button that corresponds to that tool action. So it found that for me. Okay, I have this input action. There's, I think, an input mapping context, but it also is related here for how it maps that to the actual keyboard key. There is a binding that happens, and it found that in the code, where it binds that input action to an actual code function. And I can also pull up the code as well to show that part. Oh, let me get my Visual Studio on the side. So it talks about let me just jump to that. I'm looking at the wrong file. Yeah, there's an input component that it does. There is a tool pressed action that it binds. There is a character that has the handler for that input. And then when it handles that input, I believe, let me just find that really quick. When it handles that input, it then calls into a component. That component then does a try swing, that does a timer to wait for animation, but then calls another function that does like a raycast. That raycast then has a interface it looks for, so it tries to look for objects that implement this hittable interface, and then the object can handle that interface to decide whether it takes damage or not. Um, so this is one of the ways that I think things can get pretty complicated pretty fast. So like when you're thinking about these systems, there's a lot of pieces, but there's only a couple different types of objects. There are, as I've gone through this quickly, there are actors that are interacting, there are components that it flows through, and there are interfaces for how you want to define the kind of the schema for how the components interact. And this kind of uses all those different systems. And just to kind of show the last piece, I think there is a tree file. I should pull it up. But there's a tree actor that handles the interface. So I think one of the challenges of kind of building these systems and engineering is to figure out like what is the simplest way to do this. Um, a lot of the times people make components to do this functionality, like you saw with the tool component, and people also use interfaces to do the connection between how the different components interact. So it kind of comes down to what is the simplest way to do it while not having too much simplification. Um, so usually when you build these systems, you would start with like just an actor, and that can also be a trap though. A lot of times when you have just an actor with logic on it, it ends up getting too complicated and all everything's kind of mixed together. So a lot of times that runs into issues, both from getting confused of who's responsible for what logic, and also you get into a lot of problems with if you want to have different variations of like a creature and like a wolf. It gets a bit hard to unpack which one is responsible for what type of logic. So this pattern of it using a component to encapsulate the actual interaction logic is pretty common. Um, if we look at the actual character, maybe I can talk about it from a bit higher level side, because I can find let me just find the character actor as a better thing to show off on the side. Yeah, so here's like the main character. It has like a tool component, has equipment, Um, so yeah, when I was talking about how to break things up to make this a bit simpler, one of the framings I usually think about is it seems simpler to put stuff in an actor, but oftentimes a better mental model is to think about each of your components is where the actual logic is for your system. And an actor is just a collection of different components where the actor doesn't really have much logic, but instead the actor is more of the thing that is responsible for how the components talk together and interface with each other. So a good example is when you have an event that might have an effect on multiple different systems. Like you might take damage, like hitting the tree. That might want to affect the health. It might want to play an effect. It might want to like give the player some experience. There's this event that happened in the world that wants to affect all these systems. So that kind of situation is where you think about this division between an actor and components, where an actor is good at being the event handler, delegating the effect on across multiple components, but the actor level is kind of just a router, and it's the components that should be responsible for actually handling what to do. And this was kind of an example of that, this case of the tree chop. So that was kind of a long digression, but just goes to show using these basic components of actor component interfaces, you can build these gameplay systems, and hopefully a little bit of context of how to think about it. Um, but that at a high level, that's kind of like how you can start to use Aura, just to ask about how systems work. Um, it gets a little bit more interesting when you think about how to use it to edit things. So there was one bug in here, I don't know if people saw, but if I chop down my tree, we have these little logs. If you pick them up and move them around, like the text kind of like goes under the ground and gets stuck. So oftentimes in games, as you're building these systems, you hit a lot of just random little bugs. And this is another thing that R is, I think, really great at. Like I may not know exactly how these systems work, and I would really love to have a system that kind of helps me figure out where this is. So this is a really good example of just, oh hey, there was a little bug here. I can go into agent mode, and I can just tell it, hey, like there's this text over the log that seems to rotate wrong. How can I fix that? And this is the kind of problem that I think R is really good at. One of its strengths is trying to navigate all that complexity I kind of showed. Even though something seems very simple, it might end up being a lot of moving parts. And by using Aura to tackle these problems, it can really help you just not have to worry about as much complexity and figure out where it is. So this will do some scanning, and it'll help me figure out where that bug is. So yeah, cool. So it found like, oh, there's this attachment of how it's defined on the ground item actor. If we yeah, set the position to be like absolute and the scale to be absolute, it'll help not spin. And it's also kind of convenient. You can just have it fix it for you, and that usually works too. So editing is also a useful, I think, workflow for this, just fixing bugs. And the other last category I talked about, besides just ask mode editing, is actually building the content. Um, so there were a couple of things in this level that I built just using Aura that I can walk through in a bit more detail as well, and kind of also show off my workflow. But let me finish doing this little edit. I made a couple C++ changes. It's kicking off some hot reloading to hot reload the code change, and I should finish in a second. It's recompiling. But I think the building the content is more where R really shows off where it can become a really powerful tool. A lot of the ask mode stuff is good for onboarding to new teams and like new projects and new systems. editing is good for fixing small things around the edges, but I think things become really powerful once you start using it to build new content. So the two things I was going to look at was the on the map I had showed off. I had a little loot chest that you saw working, and then I also made a couple of UI changes that I will show off too. But it looks like this is compiling. Okay, looks like it fixed it. Well, let me just see that really quick. Let's see if that actually worked. So we have our log. Let's see. Okay, cool. Yeah, the log text now stays above it, so it's less confusing. So yeah, so without really having much context about like where the issue was, what the problem was, this can really help you kind of accelerate your workflow just by fixing little things like that. But I think, as I was saying, I think it's more interesting when you start talking about like what are the workflows for building new content. So here I had that loot chest. I can go up to interact with. It spits out some some items. So to kind of walk through that, I can kind of show the process I personally took. Let me find a chat log for that. Yeah, so I had a chat where I helped it work with me to build it, and I also had a chat where I was building art for this. And it's usually good to do this in parallel because the art generation, model generation kind of takes a little while. So it's really useful to have a separate tab for the art generation and the content. For the art, I wanted to have a little loot chest that I could interact with. And I tried to tell it to make more of a painterly, like Ghibli style chest, which it made this. This was like way too high detail, and it had a lot of like extra little bits around the edges. And usually when you're making models with like model gen, it helps to have a clean background and a clean setup, so it doesn't get too confused about making the background. So I asked it with edit mode, where I just took it into this mode. I just kind of painted it out and told it to remove those details, and it came back with this image, which is what I wanted. It was a cleaned up image. And then once I had that, I had it make a 3D model. But the problem I had was the source art was a little bit too detailed. It looks kind of like very textured, didn't really fit well in the world. So I had it instead do another iteration where I had say, hey, keep the lid closed, maybe make it like simplified, stylized, and made this version. I then had it make the art for it, and it outputted this model. So, and then I asked it, hey, make another variation where it's now open and empty, just so I can have an animation that plays when it goes from open to closed. And I had it made a model for that too. So with this thread, I was able to kind of iterate on the art style, get it cleaned up, do an iteration, make the variations I wanted to for the gameplay reasons, and that worked out pretty well. From the from the loot system side, it's also really good at just helping you figure out how to build something new. Um, so I just asked it to, hey, give me kind of an overview of how to use this, our existing systems, like an interact system, to make something new from scratch. And it gave me an outline of here are the parts that are important, here are the files that you could add. It offered me to do it in C++, but I just asked it afterwards, hey, could you do it in Blueprints instead? And it gave me a plan as well in Blueprints of how to set it up. A lot of our classes supported making Blueprint derived classes of, so it asked me to, okay, make a loot entry. It asked me to make the droppable item class to drop things and make the loot chest itself. And I was going to walk through building it, but just to get the demo like ready in time, I just said, hey, build it for me. And it was able to do all that. So it did a bunch of like blueprint generation, some Python scripts. It set up those pieces, connected them together, and you saw how that kind of was working in the game. So just to kind of show that in more detail, if I just navigate to this file, So yeah, it made a loot chest kind of actor, and it made a droppable item as well as a little loot table for what it should drop. This is more of a simple system, so it's only like a couple actors. So in the main actor, it had set it up to have the art. So if I look at the viewport, it has a static mesh for a chest that I just plugged in, got a nice chest. It then implemented a function here to handle the interact. So the interact before was working with the interface, kind of like it was for the tree chopping. And if we look at the class settings, yeah, you can see it added the interactable interface. And when it did that, it implemented the event here. So when the player interacts with it, it has a state of whether it's open or not. It can only be opened once. If it wasn't opened yet, it'll mark as opened, spawn the loot, and then also it swaps out the mesh with the open version. And then that loot spawner, it has a loop where it goes over its loot table for each of those loot objects, loops over it, spawns a drop, and this has a little bit of logic where it like spawns the actor based on the loot table, and it calls initialize on it, which I think has the logic for got a little more logic for setting up the mesh, and it like yeah, it turns on physics, like kicks it up in the air, so it does the work to kind of like make it pop out of the chest. And it also set up this blueprint. And I think on this one it also had, yeah, I just had like a little variable here, which was like what things to spawn. So pretty simple. There's actor for the chest, actor for the thing dropped, and an interface to handle it. Um, yeah, and you can see that again in game. It was pretty simple. Yeah, and I think cases like this is what really excites me about these type of tools. A lot of the challenge of building a game is to figure out like what's fun. And like when I think about game dev, like the number one important quality that makes a game good is what is the iteration speed of your designers. And a lot of companies try to optimize that. And a lot of that issues tend to be just like how do you make changes? How do you have designers feel empowered? How do you make them not feel blocked by engineering and other disciplines like art to move quickly and test things? So examples like this of just throwing a loot chest in took like one prompt, could then empower a designer to go in and test it and try it out and figure out what to tweak about the game. So that's where this could become really powerful, even though it might not be like fully fleshed out. It at least empowers people to move quickly and test ideas. And I think one other interesting aspect here is it had first offered to do it in C++, but I switched to doing it in Blueprint. That's kind of another interesting decision right now about when you're building systems like this, is it better to do it in C++ or in Blueprint? I think traditionally there's been a lot of common considerations of things like performance and maintainability and whether design can iterate on it. And I think those considerations are still valid, but it's also interesting now in the more AI age. AIs are a lot more native at processing code and writing code. So the balance between C++ and blueprints, I think, are moving a lot more in the C++ direction. Um, and you can see that as well with the moves that Epic are making themselves, talking about Unreal 6, deprecating blueprints altogether. So that seems to be sort of the future where things are moving. But there is still a lot of value in making things blueprint even right now. Um, Definitely when you're doing anything that requires visuals, this is a pretty simple case of just one mesh. But if you need to kind of piece together multiple meshes or set up animations or place a light source on your mesh, you still need to have some visual interaction to kind of test and do that and edit it. So I think it's still useful to have assets like this for the visual side. And the logic side, um, it's still faster to iterate a lot of times in blueprints in terms of the iteration speed of not having to recompile and just run the editor again. I think in Unreal 5, it's still faster with blueprints. And if you tried using a lot of C++ changes, live coding is also very unstable. Luckily, it worked for me a minute ago, but a lot of times the live coding can crash, and Unreal is not really great about stability around that. So it tends to be faster, I think, to iterate on blueprints. I think the middle ground nowadays that I'd usually think about if I was making a new project mirrors some of the best practices that I used to have at like past jobs, where whenever we had blueprints, it was good to never make a blueprint just by itself. It was always good to at least have a base class in C++. That way, you're always open to moving stuff into C++ if you are hitting issues of performance or iteration of um, trying out ideas. I think also nowadays that's probably better. That way, it gives you at least the hook to have the C++ to do more code gen in. But if there's certain areas where you really know you want to iterate quickly, it might be good to then still have a blueprint to then have maybe that one function in the blueprint to kind of like tweak. So I'd probably think about structuring things in more of a middle ground nowadays. Um, I don't know where it's going to be a year from now. I don't know how much Epic's going to really push verse and other stuff. So I think it's going to change over time, but we're at a very interesting middle ground right now. I think one of the other things that involves more assets than code is when you get more into UI. Um, there was one other UI feature that I was playing with that I can also show for a second. Um, there's pretty minimal like debug UI right now. You can see there's like an axe and a bag on the bottom of the screen. And when I hit like 1 and 2, it lets me switch between the two items. But if I use my bag to pick up things, there's not too much of a UI of like what's in my inventory. So I did add a little hotkey where I can open up a very simple UI of, hey, what's in my bag? You can see I have 3 logs. And if I go over to my chest, this pops out some meat I can also pick up. So I got those in my bag too. They're missing the right icon, but you get the idea of a simple UI example. Things like this is also an interesting discussion of like what should be in blueprints versus C++. In this particular case, uh, I made this also with Aura. So just to kind of show that as context, I made I made a little inventory UI because I was trying to playtest this and I saw it was kind of confusing what I had in my bag. I just want to try it out, so I asked Aura to add a UI for this. And this is also maybe a more complicated feature. There's a lot of pieces involved. So I also tried using plan mode. So in plan mode, you can just ask it to make a plan for you. It writes a document with more details of exactly what to do. And if you agree with it, you can ask it for feedback, or you can also just hit go, and it'll build it for you. That's what it did. For just that one prompt, it was able to kind of figure out where are all the pieces, what is the inventory, how does it get the state, how does it update it, and it was able to piece it all together. And the other cool part was we have a new verification agent that it ran at the end. Um, I was saying kind of the last workflow piece was the creating stuff from scratch, but I also kind of categorize this as there being a fourth workflow mode that we're working towards right now. It's cool to make stuff from scratch, but a lot of what makes these AI tools powerful is when you can give them a good verification to check their own work. And if you can do that, you can really kind of kick them off, do like long form generation of content and like testing things. And if you've used a lot of other tools like Claude Code or Cursor or Codex, and if you worked on other kind of web development systems, they have a lot of systems for this where you might add a unit test for a new feature you're building and have the Claude Code do its generation, testing itself against unit test. You might have like a Playwright browser where the AI can go into a web browser and poke around buttons to test things. Um, and that's super powerful. It allows the system to figure out how to fix its own bugs, not have to waste your time and figure it out itself. And that's a problem that's super powerful, but it's really missing from game dev. And that's one of the problems we're also trying to solve here and make this content generation even more powerful. And it's really challenging because like when you're doing like web development, your feature is like, I want to add a button that when I press the button, gives the user like a prompt. But for game development, things tend to be a lot more fuzzy. Maybe you're adding a feature of like, I want the wolf to attack the player when they're close by. It's not really clear how to test that, and it can be subjective in a lot of cases. So we have a lot of work towards that, and we have this agent that's able to do a lot of that now, which is actually really really crazy. So just to kind of show that, I had asked it to make the UI, and it figured out by itself how to test that. Um, so it figures out from the prompt that you gave it what are some of the success criteria that it might want to test for. Obviously, opening the panel should work. If you have an empty bag, it should check that it's empty. And if you pick something up, it should be able to kind of notice that the icon showing on the screen. And kind of the crazy part is it's able to figure out all of that. And it even shows you a video when it's done of what it figured out. Um, so if I open up one of the videos it put out, let me just show this. And this is all made like just from that one prompt. It's pretty crazy. Like I asked it to test the system. It figured out, okay, I should launch the game, and I want to test the case of there being an item in the inventory. So it figured out that, okay, you get items from trees, so I should teleport the player to a tree, and you get items out of trees by chopping them down. And it figured out you do that by pressing the mouse button when you're looking at the tree to chop it down. So it figured out how to drive the player. And this is all, I didn't play this at all. This is all it playing the game itself. It then figured out that, oh, when you chop down the tree, logs pop out. And to pick up a log, you have to be looking at the log. So after it chopped down the tree, it like scanned the world. It found where the log actor was, and you'll see in a second. It teleported the player to like a log. It figured out what button to press to pick up the log, and then it figured out what button to press to look at the UI. And then through all this time, it's also taking screenshots and video to verify all the pieces are working. And from all those pieces, at the very end, it said, okay, cool, look, the item got picked up, it's in my inventory, the system worked. So yeah, this is the kind of stuff we're working on nowadays of like, the more that we can get this verification loop working, the more it can kind of automatically play test your game in QA, the more and more powerful the systems are getting. So this is a kind of a sneak peek. Some of the stuff you've been seeing in the last few patches that I think is turning out pretty cool. Um, so that's kind of an example of not just doing content creation, but doing the whole verification loop with some of our systems. Um, yeah. So from the content creation side, I just talked high level about the UI. It's also kind of interesting some of the things it tried along the way. Again, it kind of took the approach of building this with C++, and there are definitely some trade-offs of C++ versus not. For UI specifically, there's actually three different options. From C++, you can use Slate to build the UI, which in this case is what it did. It's just simple like Slate UI. Um, in Unreal, there's also a widget asset you can create using the UMG system, which is more of a visual asset-based editing of the widgets. And there's sort of a third option, which is their MVVM system, which is more of a implementation pattern for how to use the UI, the model view model pattern. There's kind of three different ways of doing it. And it's similar to the decision about does it go in C++ versus Blueprint? Do I use actors or components? This is unfortunately one of the other issues with Unreal. It's not just kind of a complicated system, but also because it's an old engine, they have a lot of iterations they've done over the same problem. As they've done their first pass of building Slate, they learned the problems that it had and the things it could improve. So they built UMG. Then once they built UMG, they tried again. Oh, okay, there's some other learnings they've had, more issues they solved. So they've layered in more of like the model view model pattern. So things can not only be complicated to set up, but Unreal also has, four versions of the same thing. So it also comes down to deciding which of those four patterns are the right one I should be doing. Um, so it is confusing, and it's one of those things that you can also use R to help talk through. There's different trade-offs for different options. It can kind of give you feedback. Um, at the end of the day, you should usually structure things in a way that it's the simplest thing you can get away with. So I like how it took Slate as its first pass. I do think Slate's a little bit overly simple. It's mostly good just for very static UI. Oops, like you can see this, it's very like simple UI. It's just icons that shows. Usually in practice, I don't think Slate is the right approach for most things. Um, it's good for static UI, but if you ever want to get into things that have animations or like more effects to it, it kind of falls over. It's not quite as good at that. And also, it's not quite as powerful in terms of like populating the UI. It's not that hard to make an icon appear, but when you get more complicated to that, in terms of like resizing windows and clicking around, having tabs, populating it with the data from your game, it gets a little bit complicated. Also, if you want to have like an image for the background, not a solid color, the way that you can attach assets into the UI also gets complicated in Slate. So in general, for this use case, I think Slate was an okay first pass, but I would usually build this stuff in the UMG system. And pattern-wise, it is useful sometimes to have a small Slate widget that you embed in a UMG widget. That way you kind of get the best of both worlds where you have a quick to creation, you can make a blueprint, or you can make a C++ Slate object pretty fast, but you still have the power to kind of move it around inside of a blueprint widget. Um, and on the UI side specifically, from that last category of the MVVM thing, that's usually something that's a bit too advanced. And that's usually something that it's important if you're on like a large AA, AAA team, and you have like a separate UI engineering team versus a separate gameplay engineering team. It's more of a pattern to help avoid contention between two groups modifying the same system from the UI and gameplay side. So I'm glad I didn't take that approach. But like a middle ground, these things are all kind of a bit subjective. And there's a similar approach to some of the other systems. So I talked about like actors versus blueprints. I talked about UI. Another system we have that's also interesting in terms of this gameplay engineering decision is we have a day-night cycle too. Um, so I had showed off in the game. Right now it's daytime, but after like a minute or so, you can see the shadows kind of moving. It's becoming nighttime. So we have a whole separate system for this, where there is a day-night manager, and there's also like a skybox actor. And these things have basically a tick function that just has time move forward. Um, Once you get past like a basic actor system, there's a couple more pieces that I think become important to learn more about. Right now, this is also just using an actor, but at this point, it's also good to start thinking about the other pieces of the main Unreal gameplay framework. There's a standard framework they have that involves other pieces like game modes, game state, player state, actors, game instance. Some of these patterns start to become more useful as you start building out your level and getting past the basic functionality. So this system in general, I'd probably think more about, is there a way to put this more into like the game mode? And I just wanted to mention that because there's some pretty good links I wanted to also mention. Uh, there's this begin play tutorial series that Epic made. They made it quite a while ago, but it's still pretty relevant. That if people are getting to this kind of point of building, the second and third gameplay system, I would start recommending people learn more about this whole framework. They have a cool they have a cool diagram here of how everything works. Um, we've talked a bit about like actors and components, but there's actually like another dozen things in here. Um, Part of the other complexity of this is when you start thinking about multiplayer games and multiple levels in the same game, level transitions. That's when things really start to get more complicated, and that's when things like the game state and player state start mattering, and replication starts mattering, and game modes start mattering once you have different levels. So right now our demo is pretty simple, so it was okay just to have a simple, chess actor and a simple daytime actor. But once you get more complicated, it's good to think more about the larger larger framework. So I could talk a bit more about some more systems. I do think there's a couple more pieces about the nighttime manager that are interesting. Um, one of the I think a lot of people don't really know about that gameplay framework of exactly when to use like a game mode versus a game instance or a game state. One of the easy path for a lot of systems are just to kind of make an actor and throw it in the map, which is what this does. But this is one of those actors where you kind of only want to have one on the entire map. So it's a little bit awkward of, okay, do I only have one or do I put like this on every map that I have? Do I put multiple of them? So things like this that are just about like the core initialization of what is a valid map for my game even. Do I want to have all my maps have a daytime cycle? That's where things like game mode becomes useful. If you have a standard template for what your game is, you can have that contain the creation of all these basic elements, like maybe your daytime system or whatever other manager you have. So the game mode starts to become more useful for managing different maps. Um, and there's a whole rabbit hole if you get more into the multiplayer games. A lot of the systems we built here, you just have like an actor for the chest, but there's a lot more challenges of it. If it's two players, how does the chest get more replicated between players? It gets more complicated. So I think yeah, I think it's kind of high level, but maybe we should kind of get more into the specifics. I had like one more system that I was going to look into. I think if we get into, so we have the campfire over here, we got our chest. There's one more piece of functionality here I was going to look through, which is the campfire. That might be also fun to poke around. So if we look at our campfire actor, this is a campfire like I was showing that has a way you can drop logs into it. It consumes those logs and it levels up, has like a progress bar. It also has like a UI for displaying the how much logs it has in it, and it also has like some VFX. So there's one more thing I wanted to do, which is try to like add a bit more functionality to the fire. So just to kind of show that off again, you can put the logs into the fire. If you actually go and play the 99 Nights game, it actually let you take the food that you found and throw it into the fire, but it's not. It didn't take my food. So I thought it'd be fun to figure out how they can maybe like get the food to cook in here too. And I'd probably approach that by taking a similar approach here, like I was showing before. Let's type in one of the prompts that I had on the side I tested before. I want to be able to put food into the campfire. When I place the food in, it should change to a cooked version and pop back out. Yeah, so if I wanted to build a new system, I'd often start like this. I would think about like what do I want to build, and I'd have Aura do the first like initial pass of trying to figure out how to integrate that. This one should be fairly easy. It's just reusing the same system that it takes the pull in logs, and it should be able to figure out how to get it to also take in food. And while that's going, we can also look a bit more at the campfire. You can see it has a intake zone, which is just like bounds that it uses to detect that it's overlapping the logs you throw in. Oh, and R is starting to make a plan for me already. And the system was also built in C++, so you can see it has a intake zone component. And it's talking about, okay, there's a cooking recipe, you might want to define, the actor might want to add a recipe. And then it has a certain function, this onIntake function. So if we look at that, when the campfire is first created, it has that intake zone we had saw in the blueprint, which is basically just the sphere component. And you can see up here it's even creating it. It's making a sphere component. It has collision on it. It's only query collision, which means that it can like detect things touching it, but doesn't actually block it. So it lets the logs fall into it, but it only detects the logs are there. On setup, it's then binding a callback here. So when an overlap begins, it can be set up to call this function. And that's the setup we want. So we have this sphere, it detects overlaps, and we get a callback when things overlap it. And then in here, it tries to figure out if the thing dropped in, if it was an item, it figures out how many of them there were. So if you threw in like a stack of logs, and it figures out how to add it to the fuel of the actor. So if we wanted to extend this, this would probably be the right place. And it seemed like Ara figured out how to add that. So it was suggesting here that we make a branch in here. If we did have an overlap, probably check if it's something compatible with a cooking recipe. That might kick off like a cook to do probably a timer to see after a second. Maybe the cook like finishes, and then it would probably also need a function to spit it back out. So this is another simple example of it's mostly just within one actor. It's a bit simpler. There's no interaction between actors, but it's all done in the C++ side. This actor also manages the fuel like I was showing here. So it has a certain amount of fuel that it tries to add for the log case that you put in. It has a tick function where it keeps track of how much fuel it has. You can see it's doing some logic to kind of burn down the fuel every second. And then, yeah, at some point it'll run out of fuel. It also has the UI that drives here as well. I did want to get to more of the cooking, but I think we are actually getting low on time. I touched a bunch of the systems, and I think I may not have time to fully finish the cooking here. But that was basically a quick overview of some of the things in this map, how they work, a couple of glimpses into like what were some of the prompts that we used to build them, as well as once it gives you the result of what it suggested, some of the things to think about for when you're trying to figure out if it's the right plan or not and give it direction. I did want to leave a couple minutes before we got too far if there are any questions or just generally gameplay engineering observations from the chat. Trying to take a look. Yeah, I see a few chats. People are talking to themselves though. But yeah, I feel like it's a pretty like rough overview of the pieces here. Okay, I'll just let it finish this last part while it's the last few minutes while I'm chatting here. I'll just have it make the code changes for me. Let's see. It looks like it should be a pretty straightforward change, so hopefully it's able to just knock it out. The For some system like this, I would usually want to make more of like an asset, maybe to define the cooking recipes. It tends to be easier to maintain, especially if you have like a data table full of assets of the different cooking recipes. It looks like it's going to set up just a basic one for the moment. While that turns, it should look like mostly a C++ change. In the original game, if you play this, there's also a crafting table here. They have a similar functionality where you can throw in the items, and it can be used to kind of craft more objects. Okay, so it's figured out, I think, what food items to use. It's now working on the implementation. Yeah, someone in the chat mentioned the summarization. Yeah, I think in our last patch we had like a bug or two that we've been trying to iron out. It's a it's an interesting problem of if you have a long history of chat, you want it to kind of go on as long as you can and try to remember the context as well as you can. There's kind of a technical limitations on how much it can keep in its history, but it's definitely a solvable problem that we're still working on, trying to optimize every patch. The goal would be to allow you to keep using the thread as long as you want. There are also options of just making new threads. It's usually, in general, you tend to get a bit better accuracy if you try to break up your work into individual tasks, and for each task, kind of start a new tab in the RUI like I had done here. That tends to give it a bit more focus on the problem you're trying to solve one by one. Okay, so it's just doing a final compile here, and we can try to see how well it did. Should just be done in a minute. Okay. And luckily it did not crash. If you've used Unreal for a long time, you get a little bit scared of seeing live compiling. So if we look at our campfire function now, it does, yeah, still look for items being thrown in. It checks if there's this cooking recipe that takes in this item and kicks off a cook instead of doing the fuel intake. And the cooking does some logic of doing a timer to like perform the cook. So if I look at the campfire, I think the campfire was going to have in the class defaults. Is that where it added the recipe? Yeah, it looks like it added some cookie recipes for me. And that's cool. It seemed like it actually made by itself the cooked version of the meat and plugged them in, as well as the cooking time here as well. So we can just test to see if it worked. Let's just see what happens. So I got my meat. Let's take my meat morsel. I'm not sure it has the art for it. Okay. Okay, seems like it didn't quite pick the right. It may not be detecting the item type quite right. But the logic looked close. Let's just try to like put a breakpoint here really quick. Let's see. So it found. Yeah, okay. I think the item type didn't quite match up, but it looks like the logic's there. I probably just have to go in and tweak the item type to be quite right. But anyways, I think we're kind of getting to time at this point. Um, if anyone else has any kind of topics or questions in the chat, I'm happy to talk more about general gameplay stuff. Otherwise, I think we're probably going to have another stream next week. like I was saying, we've been making these demo maps um, every week. This is our second one. And we have a third one that's being worked on. It's pretty cool. I think we're probably going to show that off next week. We'll have to see if the art team is ready for that. But we'll have another stream, I think, Friday of next week. So we'll talk more about topics. And also, please continue to let us know. We're trying to talk about different topics of like art and gameplay, and please let us know what's going to be the most useful and interesting. We want to kind of show off how Aura works, some of the workflows it could be used as well as just general kind of advice for building games. So please let us know what's useful, what's cool. We love talking about this stuff, so please let us know. But otherwise, I think we're going to have the stream next week, and our yeah. So I think that's about it. So thanks for people that are here. Thank you for hanging around and listening to me ramble. It was fun. So thank you for watching, and we'll have a stream next week.